What's up guys? Today we're talking camera basics, but for video this time, and that video is coming up right now. Alright, so this is a video continuation on the first video I did talking about camera basics, photography. This one's going to be more about video and how these same settings affect your video production. Alright, so let's talk about shutter speed when it comes to video production. If you haven't seen my initial video on camera basics where I go into a little bit more details on what shutter speed is, make sure you click on this card right here and we'll talk about that. Alright, so shutter speed when it comes to video production, what this does is it either stiffens up or it smooths out the motions that happen within the video. In other words, if you have a really high shutter speed for video production, your subject is going to be moving very robotic, kind of you will not see that smooth motion that we as human beings are accustomed to seeing. Whenever somebody does like a motion like this, you could see a trail of my hand coming behind it. That's what you call motion blur, natural motion blur. Your eyes pick this up naturally. This is why when you're doing video production, you do 1/50 pretty much all the time whenever you're doing a 23 or 24 frames per second recording. If you're gonna be doing 60, you're gonna be doing twice that. So the rule of thumb is you always wanna be doing double your shutter speed of the frames that you're currently shooting at. So if you're shooting 23, which is pretty much the standard, most people shoot 23, 23.9, which is very close to 24. So a lot of people say it's 24. It's 24 for us. In Europe, I believe it's 25, the standard, but for the most part, or for most of my audience, it's gonna be 24. So if you're shooting 24, you always wanna do double that, which will lead you close to 50, which is the increments that some of these cameras go up to. So 50, 100, so on and so forth. So for example, my camera, the one that I'm filming right now, my shutter speed goes in small increments to the point where it gets to 50. So I can't do 47, I can't do 48, stuff like that, which is double of my frame rate. The closest thing that I can do is 50, and that's where I'm gonna wanna set it, the closest possible to double of my frame rate. Now, as you can see, I did double my frame rate, which you guys saw the motion blur that it was creating. This right now is 1/125, and I did this specifically so I can show you guys something. I had to increase my light output here. I'm using window light right now, so I had to increase the light that's coming in by opening up the window a bit more. And now, as you're gonna see, my hand is not leaving any trails. My hand is just moving stiff. It's very, very stiff, and this is not a very flattering look because it doesn't portray the natural motion blur that we perceive as human beings when we're looking at something. All right, now we're back at 1/50, and you guys can see that motion blur I was telling you about back again. And everything that I'm gonna be doing, you're gonna start to see it's more like fluent. It's almost like if I'm in front of you talking to you guys doing this, because this is the natural way that things are perceived as human beings, and the same thing goes for cameras. Now, how about aperture? How does aperture come into play when we're talking about video? It's pretty much the same thing. Aperture is either gonna increase or decrease the amount of light that your camera is receiving when you're doing video productions, but it also creates that effect I spoke about on my first video where it creates that shallow depth of field. So as you guys could see, back here, everything here is out of focus. So all of that is out of focus. So if I was to increase my, let's say f8 aperture, you see how dark it is right now? I have to compensate with this by, I can't do shutter speed because shutter speed is set over 1/50, and if I don't have to change it, it's better not to. So I'm gonna have to do ISO. So I have to compensate with ISO. So we're at about 2000, let's do 3200 more or less. As you guys can see, it's still blurry because of the distance of me, which is the focusing point, and the background. However, it's more in focus. It looks more in focus. The chair looks more in focus now. For what I could see, focus is tack sharp all the way up to maybe a foot behind my chair for what I could see at f8. So you decrease the shallow depth of field that you create with aperture. Now let's go ahead and reverse this effect, and I want you guys to stay looking at this part right here, the background, so you guys can see how that changes. All right, now we're back at our standard 400 ISO, which is the best settings that I can use for my C-Log recording, which we'll talk about that a little bit further on the line with other videos. We're going to talk about C-Log, V-Log, all these different log profiles, but for now, 400 is what I'm using right now, and we're back at 1/50 at 2.8. As you guys can see back here, this is completely like blurred out of focus. This is what shallow depth of field is. Now, anything past my cushion right here starts to become very blurry. Like my chair, the back of my chair right here, it starts to become blurry already. And then the grid section here on my softbox is actually blurry. So you guys can see how this effect can change for positive, for negative, more light, less light, shallow depth of field, etc. and etc. These are things that you're going to be using either for compensating for one setting or another, or you can also create very interesting images and videos using these settings creatively. Now ISO, as I was talking a few seconds ago, it changes different aspects of your video, but essentially it's the same thing. ISO is the sensitivity of your sensor. In the same way you get grain on photos, you get them on video as well. You're gonna get them like these little tiny grains, particles falling all over your image, and you're gonna start to see them like flicker in and out, especially on dark areas. So areas like these right here, and like the back of my pillow, these sections are gonna be actually very hard for that grain to be removed from, because it's the darkest areas in your image. So you always want to make sure you're lighting up your videos correctly. Exposing for your video productions is key when it comes to having great quality videos. So always make sure you're exposing. If your camera has the ability to do a histogram, which I extremely recommend, always try to keep that histogram right in the middle or as close to the middle as you possibly can without blowing up. When I say blowing up, without overexposing the light or the white parts of your image. For example, you see my face right here. This is probably the lightest part of this entire video. So you want to expose for the lightest part of your video. In this case, it's gonna be my face. So I'm gonna be controlling the light that comes in and the light that comes out based on how I want my video to look. So I'll either let more light in or I'll close the curtains so I can let more light or stops light from coming in until I have a picture where I'm happy with. Now, since I shoot in log, and we're gonna be talking about this later on, I want to make sure I expose for my skin in a way that I will be able to play with it later on in post-production. Now I'm gonna do an entire video about post-production and C-Log, V-Log, S-Log as well later on down the line. But this is the settings I'm shooting on, so I wanted to give you guys a little bit of background, because I did mention in the first video that you always want to keep your ISO at 100, and this is true. This is true no matter what you're doing. However, when it comes to C-Log, that changes a little bit when we're talking about log profiles. All right, so a quick recap. Shutter speed is probably the most important setting when it comes to video production. Aperture is more of a substitute setting where you either increase or decrease depending on how much light you want in and if you want a creative aspect to it. ISO, same thing. ISO is the sensitivity of your sensor, and depending on what you're shooting, you're gonna wanna increase it or decrease it. If you're shooting in plain day, most likely your setting is gonna be either 50 if you're shooting a Sony or 100 if you're shooting pretty much anything else. Anything above that will come into play if you're shooting a different type of log profile, or if you any type of different profile. You're gonna have to do some research on what is the best ISO setting for that profile that you're shooting on. But we'll talk about log profiles and all those advanced features in a later video. As of right now, thank you guys so much for watching. If this helped you out at all, if you have any other questions, please leave them in the comments below. Make sure you leave a like if this video helped you out or if it answered any questions for you. And as always, I'll see you guys on the next one.